Realtors, what's the dumbest reason someone decided not to buy a house from her? Story 1. Realtor here had a couple that wanted to live in a specific neighborhood and wanted a rectangular pool with a small pool house and covered patio. There were exactly 3 houses in the neighborhood that met these requirements. I spoke with all 3 owners, and one said they would sell and they were generous on their pricing. Why, you ask, did the couple decide not to buy the house next door was yellow? Story 2. I knew someone who didn't buy a house because it had too many closets, other than that they thought the house was perfect. After a moment of stunned silence, I suggested they buy the house and close some closet doors and just not use the closets. Story 3. Spent around 2 months looking for a property with the couple. They barely qualified for what they were looking for, so each offer was a battle just to get it reviewed. Finally found a house that had a willing seller, good listing. Agent, and it checked all but one box. That box, the guest bathroom, had a shower curtain the wife didn't like. Seriously, not a glass door or anything permanent, but a removable curtain held up by those bars you twist into. Place, I even offered to buy them a $200 gift card for Home Depot or Bed Bath & Beyond to help them find something different. Nope, that curtain killed the whole thing for the wife. Needless to say, I fired them as clients immediately after that. Story 4. Found a dead body in the bathroom. Apparently a contractor working in the house decided to shoot up before he left on Friday, and nobody was in the house all weekend, and he was found by Monday afternoon during a showing. Story 5. Not a realtor, but I worked in finance at an RV dealership. A few years back, I had a couple fly in from out of state to look at a brand new $400 000 unit that had specific features they were after, and they put a deposit on it. I got them approved and scheduled a time for them to sign, but they backed out at the last minute because they weren't sure their cat would like it. They flew back home. Story 6. My family home was bought by a young man in the military and his very quirky wife. They had already ruled out dozens of houses and settled on ours because it had adequate chai flow from the front door. When they saw that the bed was directly under a window in the bedroom, the wife freaked out and said that it was sucking out our brains. Story 7. When we were house hunting, my husband and I found a listing for a duplex unit at 69 BJ St. Unfortunately, it wasn't the right fit for us, but I hope whoever picked it up is making the most of their raunchy new address. Story 8. Not me, but my dad did some residential and commercial back in the 70s. Lady came in and loved the house until they got to a guest bedroom that was painted yellow. She instantly switched and said, "I can't buy this house because this is yellow. My dad says we'll paint it any color you want." Her response drove him to do strictly commercial after that, but I'll know it was yellow once. Story 9. When we were looking at houses in the early 2010s, we went to see what we thought was a really nice house. The listing did not show any pics of the finished basement. We toured the upstairs and were very happy. Then we went downstairs. The stucco on the walls was the hard icing kind, which had been pulled outwards into sharp points, so that if you had fallen down the stairs, you would have impaled yourself. There was a wet bar made of thousands of pieces of tacky cowboy kitsch that had padded faux leather with buttons on the 3 surrounding walls. Everything was glued, screwed, nailed to the wall, including the animal heads, and was listed as included with the sale-it. Smelled odd. There was a giant shrine to Mary with a water feature and a ton of plants embedded in a divider wall. It took up the whole wall, and we couldn't figure out how they had run the water supply. There was a bathroom off. The wet bar, it was purple. The walls were purple. The floors were purple. All of the porcelain was purple and had Russian oligarch-style gold fittings. It matched nicely with the all-teal master bedroom en suite. After about 10 minutes of looking at this, our realtor glanced at us, said this is too bizarre, and suggested we leave. The house was still on the market a year later. Story 10. This story goes back to around 1960, but my parents found it so stupid. They told me a family friend and his young wife found a home they wanted to buy. The wife's mother was going to give them the down payment. They were super excited about the house and said it even had a breakfast bar, i.e. a counter with bar stools underneath in the kitchen. The mother said no way would she ever allow her money to be spent on a house with a bar. They tried to explain it to her, but ultimately could not buy the house. Story 11. Not a realtor, but potential buyer. Our realtor brought us to a house listed as a 3BR 212 bath. After going through the house, we liked it a lot until something clicked for us. There were no bathrooms to be found. We went through the house again, and upon opening a closet door in a bedroom, we found inside the tiny closet a single toilet, no light, sink, tub, nothing. The house wasn't even a 1-bath, it was like 1 14-bath, the realtor very seriously told us if we knocked down the wall, ran some pipes, we could convert one of the bedrooms into the bathroom. We laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. Story 12. I had one experience while we were looking for a house where we were the ones that came across as weird for our reasoning to not buy it. We had found a really nice house and everything about it seemed great. I had one concern about a tree that was planted extremely close to the house, and I wanted to look into it because you don't want foundation problems. Not all trees have roots that will damage a foundation if they're planted close though. So I found out what kind of tree it was to see if it would be a problem. In the process of learning about the tree, I found out that it was a yew tree and that the pollen of male yew trees are chemotoxic, meaning it is toxic to cancer cells. However, it has this effect by functioning in your body as if you were taking low levels of chemo drugs basically, so people end up with low-grade symptoms of chemotherapy from exposure to the pollen of this tree, and most of the time have no idea why they feel sick. So we told the real estate agent that we were interested in the house, but needed to know one thing: is the tree in front of the house right up against the large window, male or female? She asked the owners and they said they didn't know, but I imagine they thought that was a weird question. Laugh out loud. Since they couldn't tell us, we decided not to buy the house. Story 13. Love the house. It fit all our needs. We were pumped. As we were leaving, we stood in the porch to take in the neighborhood. The house directly across the street had built shelves into the windows facing the house we were viewing. The shelves were filled with old creepy dolls staring at the house. We were looking at hundreds of dull, lifeless eyes waiting for you to go to sleep so they could kill you. They were sun-faded. We need out of there with our realtor's blessing. It was 20 years ago and it still freaks me out. Why? Just why? Story 14. My partner was a bit more superstitious than me, but not to the point where I ever thought it was odd or obnoxious. Entered the downtown house we both looked at. It was small and old and quirky, which I was okay with. It had a pond in the backyard, and I love ponds. So we get to the house and go in. It is extremely segregated. There are many oddly shaped rooms and lots of doors and no hallways and no flow. We get to the kitchen and there's a very narrow and small door leading up to the attic access. I realize now that's pretty normal for old houses, but at the time my reaction was more, oh, Nebraska, neat, like a hidden passage. My partner, however, saw that hidden doorway and got very spooked and just bluntly and suddenly told me and the realtor, "I'm sorry, this house is a no for me. I hate it. I'll be outside." We both looked at each other like, and I followed him asking him what was wrong. He totally had the heebie-jeebies and was almost shivering and was like, "I'm not going back in there. There is something really wrong with that house." I asked him if it was okay if I finished looking at it, and he said that was fine, but there was no way. We were buying it. The real turn. I finished the tour just fine. I didn't find anything odd about it at all. It was just a bit of a weird layout. It needed some fixing and the house had no flow. The pond was neat. My partner never was able to articulate further on what creeped him out so bad about the house. Story 15. While not very bizarre, it's always strange to me when someone won't buy their dream home because of the address number. Honorable mention: during an open house I was hosting, someone pulled sage out of their pocket and started burning it to get Satan out of the black countertops. Story 16. I'm not a realtor, but one of my childhood friend's mothers was, and she told me this story when I was in 4th grade, and I still think about it. Nearly 20 years later, she came home upset one day after school, and we asked her, "What's wrong?" She said she just lost a sale because of a toilet seat during the initial walk through. Her client pointed out an epoxy toilet seat that was filled with seashells and how much she loved it. She made an offer on the house. Later, they do the final walkthrough right before going to go sign the closing documents, and that toilet seat is gone and replaced with a normal white one. The woman is pissed and refuses to close without the toilet seat. The sellers refuse to give her the toilet seat. The sale falls through. Can you imagine buying a whole ass house because you want an epoxy toilet seat? This was the 90s, so there wasn't the whole internet of things at our fingertips to just up and get a replacement, but still. Story 17. It gave serial killer vibes. Really nice from the outside, and the interior only need a little work within our price range. In a neighborhood we were already familiar with. Checked all boxes. There's a bonus room, like a storage room, adjacent to the garage. Our realtor told us. We walked through the house thinking this one might be it. We opened the door to the bonus room, and immediately my wife gives me a look of both concern and discomfort. I too felt it. The same sensation. By all accounts, a normal looking storage room. with some empty shelves and racks to hang tools from. However, something about a random-ass portable deep utility sink sitting in the back wall in the dark. Creeper us both out. We walk through the room and I don't say anything, but instead, waiting for my wife to speak. First few seconds later, she says, "Yep, some has killed and cut up a human body in here. I just know it. I don't like it. I'm not superstitious, and I could have easily explained how easily it would be to remodel and decorate the room, but I laughed and responded in agreement as I tried laughing it off so that the realtor didn't think we were crazy. Wasn't an urgent, intense feeling of, we're going to die if we stay here, but rather I'd rather not sleep in the same house. A murderer conducted his business. Very strange, irrational, and random for either of us to think that way. But we both did unprompted and essentially communicated and confirmed via body language. Our thoughts. P.S. Realtor did in fact think we were crazy and was tired of showing us an eighth house of the day. We had agreed to wrap up in defeat, but my wife begged him to show us one more way out of our price range and one that I wasn't wanting to look at B. She insisted we take a look because it's so pretty on Zillow. He annoyingly agreed, as did I, but we liked it and moved money around and negotiated to make it work. Realtor has loved us since we're too picky about insignificant things. We've worked together on multiple projects, but he loves reminding us about the serial killer room in which he sold a few weeks afterwards and explains that a happy non-murdering family lives there now. Story 18. Walked into the house and noticed a crystal hanging from the ceiling in the kitchen. There were more, kind of strange, but okay. Went upstairs and all of a sudden they were 10, 15 in the hallway. Then we got to the basement room in the back corner, opened the door and turned on the light hell's bells. That is when it went to a 10. It was a dungeon. We backed out, looked at the realtor, and she said it before. We did. We are never talking about this. Story 19. Sort of related. My wife and I looked at buying a house, and the owner said that the 12 chickens in the garden coop came with the property. I laughed and said, fine, we'll just eat roast chicken for the first 12 weeks we live here. They refused to sell the house to us. Story 20. We actually did end up buying this house, but might have passed had we paid enough attention. My husband and I live in an extremely in-demand area and needed a larger house really badly after having our first kid. Found one that just went on the market in a neighborhood that we had previously driven through, and liked husband had COVID, so I toured it alone and texted him to just put in an offer, so he did. We were in contention with like 10 other people the day the house went on the market, but I wrote a great letter to the current owners, and we got it fast forward to moving in, and we realized that the 2-car garage is too short to realistically park a car in. I can squeeze my Honda CR-V in, but it's nose-touching wall and ass-touching door. Once we realized this, we finally noticed that every single house in the neighborhood has their cars parked in the driveway. I looked at the house during the workday, so cars weren't in the driveways, and honestly, I probably wouldn't have noticed anyway, because why would anyone see cars in driveways and assume that meant that every single garage was too short to functionally store a car? Story 21. I didn't buy a house once because the realtor was a dip schmid. The house was perfect except for one thing in the kitchen. There was a crack in the middle of the granite. When my wife pointed it out, the realtor told us, it raises the value of the home because that's unique and considered art. No other home will have that crack. And he did not say it in a joking manner. For that dumbass statement, we left and didn't buy the home. Story 22. Just a note, House Hunters is totally fiction. They shoot after a house is purchased, and the other 2 are houses that happen to be for sale that match the area. I am selling an unconventional home, and my realtor was approached to see if they could use my home in the show. I declined because all they would do is point out why not to buy my house. My realtor said she's had clients do this before, and they're always upset as it paints a house. You're trying to sell in a poor light, and you don't get any money for it. Story 23. Literally happened to me last week. Showed my home off market to a couple from Minnesota. They flew into my area for a weekend specifically to see my house because they liked the photos I sent them of the place they wanted. A home with 5 bedrooms all on the 2nd floor and at least 4K. My house is the only one within 130 mi for sale fitting that description. And we put a lot of work in what the prior owners did to the place. The prior owner thought he knew how to do his own work. He did not. We spent tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours fixing stuff. He died poorly, and sometimes dangerously. They come and spend 2 hours meticulously going through everything. They love the house, and their realtor said on the side they'd put in an offer within the next day. Then they drove off the next day. My realtor calls me near in tears laughing, saying that he just got off the phone with their realtor. The couple decided not to put in an offer because a full street over and down a hill there are above ground power lines, they thought. Those power lines were 5-gram cell towers in a cluster, and they were terrified that it was going to beam Co into their kids' heads if they played outside. They said it with a straight face to their realtor. Apparently the kicker is that there's actually a 5 grams tower 2 doors down from my house that they didn't even notice. They ultimately bought a very small house 2 towns over with no above ground power lines but with, and 5 grams towers in the vicinity. Edit. Terrified, not mortified. Edit 2. Added a couple more details for a more complete picture. Story 24. Not necessarily bizarre, but I feel it's worth sharing. Recently I found an amazing home for a client in a higher price range. The seller relocated for a job and only owned the home for 2 years. The listing agent copied the language from the previous listing, which included the words new roof, new hot water heater, and put those 2 things on the very top of the updates and features marketing flyers. Both of those things were installed in 2006. So, not remotely new. And in fact, both are end of life. Talk about a Schmid storm. My client's buyers absolutely lost their Schmid. I'm not kidding. They said, we want to know what the sellers knew and when did they know it, and we're going to want both of those replaced and a discount on the sale price too. It was a stupid honest mistake by the sales agent. She was careless and it cost her the entire commission because she ended up having to pay for both of those items out of her own pocket. ET. We can argue about what was right or wrong or who's at fault or who completely overreacted. But the point for bringing up the story is that trust is so vitally important to the selling process. Once it's broken, it never comes back. Even though my clients ended up getting everything they wanted, they're still not happy. And I suspect every day they walk into that house, they're going to think, what else did the sellers lie about? Really surprised they moved forward with the sale, thought for sure they'd back out. Story 25. Buyer not realtor, but trying to buy a house with a small budget was not fun. Even 6 years ago, there was one house we knew would be bad because there were no interior photos. We were still not prepared. There was feces smeared in the living room. The ceiling was literally falling down in several places, and the den had no floor, just joists to go with the collapsing ceiling. The bathroom was covered in what I really hope was black mold. Basically, if you let your mind run wild about what a house abandoned, probably 20 years in the ghetto would look like, that was it. It was actually kind of sad because through the rock cut and ruin we could tell it had been a gorgeous house once upon a time. Was also up near the top of our budget. They wanted $73,000 for it. Then there was the house that had a bizarrely short stove and vent hood. My best friend is 5 feet 4 inches and he stood taller than this hood. It wasn't low enough to the ground for a little person either, just really awkwardly sized. Nothing about the house was wheelchair accessible, so it wasn't that either. But the reason we had to nope out of there was the mold. We were all short of breath. After only about 10 minutes, coincidentally, we ended up buying a house very close to that one. So I've been able to watch it be flipped again and again. Someone was living in it a short while, but they left, and I'm positive it was because of mold. Last I saw, the newish siding was being pulled off the house, and they were doing something underneath it. Somewhat hilariously, 3 out of the 4 houses on that intersection are in the process of being flipped. One, they're asking like $354K for another, was just taken off the market after the price was lowered incrementally from $190K to $160K. The 4th is also empty, but it doesn't seem to be an investment property yet. But the one that really fits here. Okay, understand, for one, they lied about the number of bedrooms. We were told 3, there were 2, and you had to turn sideways to go between the utility shed and house into the backyard, which was tiny. But that's not what made me take it off the list. There were churches front and back, literally a church across the street in the front, and another on the other side of the backyard, one Baptist, one Seventh-day Adventist. If memory serves, not exactly denominations known for being quiet and leaving early on Sundays. We'd have been penned in by traffic at least once a week. Story 26. Not a realtor, but a CO worker lost a sale because the inspector was an idiot. I don't know the exact details, but when pouring foundation, sometimes the pour runs out of cement in one truck and finish pouring it with another before it comes close to drying, similar to how you would pour the rest of milk from one carton before adding milk from a new carton. Apparently that can leave slight discoloration line, but that's about it. The buyer cheaped out and got a newbie inspector who saw AIGN discoloration and thought it was a huge symmetrical foundation crack that looped around the foundation. The buyer's real estate agent basically went WTF, told him to find an experienced Inspector She herself hired an experienced inspector who came in and explained the exact situation to her client, but the client, understandably so, got spooked and walked away. Co-workers sold it a month later at the same price to another buyer who had a qualified inspector, so it was more annoyance than anything else. But don't cheap out on the inspector, they're important. Story 27. I would hope this is one of the weirdest reasons our realtor had ever heard listings. Said 4-bedroom, 1.5 bath, and it seemed decent in the house photos, so we went to take a look. It took us a while to find the half bath. It was basically a wooden house attached to a wall in the basement. No plumbing at all, it just emptied out onto the floor and everything rolled downhill to the drain in the middle of the room. Nope. Story 28. There was a house we looked at that met most of our criteria, but when we went back outside, we noticed that the next door neighbor has all these signs on this porch posts: keep out, not trespassing, beware of dog, etc. And piles of junk furniture and machinery on the porch, not who want to live next door to. Story 29. My elderly parents were looking to buy a house in the city where I live. One house met all of their criteria, and the furnishings inside even matched the furniture in their own home. Unfortunately, they were concerned that the arrangement of the kitchen would make it difficult for someone in the living room to hear the TV if someone in the kitchen was running the garbage disposal. I don't think they really wanted to move. Story 30. I once was selling a high-end Class A RV. A couple drove 4 hours to see it once at my house. They complained the whole time about the city traffic. To combat the traffic, they literally drove all back roads to get to my house. Avoided highways because traffic was too much for them. I'm thinking, if you can't handle traffic in that little car, how are you going to drive this rig anyway? I showed them the RV and they loved it. The wife tells me how she lost her son, etc., etc., and she just doesn't know if she feels right spending the money because she's not over his death. However, they need this rig because they want to live it in on their property while their house is being renovated after 2+ hours of back and forth. I start closing up the rig. I said, call me after you make a decision. A day later, the husband calls me with a question. He wants to know if the refrigerator is electric. Yes sir, it's electric, and it will also run on the inverter on batteries. Then he starts into the, I don't know if I should spend this type of money spiel. I was nice and said something to make him feel okay. Okay. He said he didn't know what to do. He hangs up calls the next day, same thing about money, etc. I finally stopped him and said, look, with all due respect, I'm not forcing you to buy the rig. However, you called me. This is the price. Are you interested? Yes or no? He said he didn't know if spending the money. Click. I hung up the phone. Phone rings the next day. New guy calling on the rig, and he had a ton of questions. I spent an hour on the phone and then asked, where are you from? It was about 10 hours. Hard drive. He says, I'll be up there on wet. I'm thinking, this guy isn't showing sure. The guy shows up with his wife, looks over the rig and says, I'll take it on one condition. I'm thinking, oh Schmidt, now what he says he needs to have the bank overnight a cashier's check, so he'll need to stay in a hotel for a couple days. I said, if the check is coming, you own the rig. Now you can stay in the rig in the driveway. They were grateful, went to the store, got some sheets and food, and the check showed up when they said it would. Drove it home and stayed in touch for a year with the couple. Story 31. During home inspection, one of the bolts that held down the master bedroom ensuite toilet was not installed, called into the floor straight. Thus, the bolt holding down the toilet wasn't sitting flush with the base of the toilet. The wife was uncomfortable sitting on a bent toilet. The husband was furious with the reason, canceled the deal. Anyway, second home she canceled because we couldn't confirm if anyone had died in the home. Husband was going to lose his Schmidt. She ended up liking another home, which I thought was worse than the last one, and in a worse neighborhood. Husband signed quickly in case she changed her mind. Good times. LOL. Story 32. The owners had a clause in the purchase and sales that the buyer would have to guarantee that the resting site of their deceased and beloved cat would not be disturbed forever and the placard would remain intact. Story 33. The bizarre was more from the sellers, and we acted accordingly. But they had let bamboo grow straight through the stone foundation of the 1890 home. We were going to buy. Our inspector specialized in historic homes and had never seen anything like it. They also had installed a very nice new HVAC, but cut clear through the main support beam of the house to run ductwork for it. Story 34. Back in 2010, when foreclosures were still skyrocketing and prices were dropping, I was the buyer's agent. I had a sale fall through at the closing. Both parties had everything. They owned and moving trucks. The seller was bitter about prices, saying he was getting ripped off, etc., etc. He removed the chandelier in the two-story foyer, and he wasn't supposed to, as it was attached and did not have an amendment saying it did not convey go to the walk-through, and the buyer immediately said he wants that specific chandelier, or he is not buying it. I called the seller's realtor, said she knows she told him not to take it, etc. But the seller said nope. He is taking it, thought we could close by offering $500 each from our commissions, since there was no way the seller was going to budge. Buyer said no, went up to $1,000 each, so $2. 0,000 total, and there is no way that chandelier cost $500, and buyer said, I want that one from that jerk. Told the seller he still had to pay our commission because we held up our end and brought him the buyer, he didn't care. Cooler heads did not prevail. Buyer sued for his moving and living costs. Seller went Fesbo, so have no idea what he got. Buyer lost confidence in me, so he went somewhere else. New build PC in a different part of town. It was a very expensive nightmare. Story 35. Not really bizarre, but a fun story. EY buyer was looking at a house. The ad looked great, cabin-style house. Lots of new upgrades, around 15 acres of land. It looked great. And I scheduled a walkthrough. I looked it up on Google Maps to get directions, and that's when I noticed an old dirt road at the edge of the property labeled Dump Road on Google Maps. I followed it back to a clearing toward the end of the property. Immediately, I figured this was probably an old landfill, and it would be a deal breaker, as this house is not on city water on site. It was very obvious. It was an old landfill. So we called the seller's agent with questions. I asked about the groundwater, and he assured us that it was perfect, and there is absolutely nothing to worry about. Then we discovered thousands of dollars in Culligan water filtration systems in the basement. The sales agent also said the old is a good thing, because we could ride four-wheelers and dirt bikes back there. Couldn't believe I was hearing. Story 36. The reason I didn't buy one house was my realtor was running late, so I was parked in my car near the house I was going to look at on the side of the road for about half an hour, about 2, maybe 3 blocks away in a rural area was Schuylkill, Washington. About that time, this pulls out of the driveway of the house I'm scheduled to see, pulls up alongside my car, rolls down the window, takes a picture of me with their phone, then flips me off before they peel out the tires and drive off at high speed. Turns out it was the homeowner that was trying to sell. So, yeah, I didn't even bother with seeing the inside of what was an otherwise good prospect because I was so irritated. At the owner, my realtor later gave their listing agent a call about it because they were annoyed about missing out on a potentially large commission, and I later found out the owner thought I was a druggie trying to steal wifey from him, not sure why, as I was in a pretty nice car wearing a suit that day, but yeah, I did not buy that house. Story 37. We had an offer come in for an apartment in Park Slope. Now, great apartment, great location. Guy puts in an offer slightly over asking, and we're stoked. Then he pulls it back because he was freaking out about there being 2 working fireplaces. Apparently this was causing him anxiety, so he went to his therapist to talk about it. And they made the decision that it would cause him too much ongoing anxiety to have those fireplaces. I have no idea why fireplaces would cause anxiety. I saw them as a positive. But anyway, we sold it for slightly less, someone else, and the guy didn't have to deal with knowing there were fireplaces in his apartment. Win-win. Story 38. Not a realtor, but used to work for one. Had a client who was ready to close on a house, then backed out at the last minute because the neighborhood did not have an HOA. I was stunned. My family was driven from the first house I grew up in by a psychotic HOA president who happened to be our next-door neighbor. Harpies from hell, all of them except maintenance-only ones, but pretty much all of those exist because someone got out of control. Story 39. We were buying a house in Buffalo while living in Florida, so long-distance shopping with an in-person trip to see the final contenders. When we arrived, we had about 5 houses on our list. The realtor took us aside and said, I have to tell you that a murder has been committed in the houses you picked out. We're like, well, which house? And he said, this house and this other house, 2 houses. How did we manage that? Well, there was a man, and one of the houses was his parents' house, and the other was the house with his wife and kids. Apparently, he killed his mom at the one house, killed his wife at the second house, and was stopped by a cop for speeding, which saved his dad's life. Dad was at work and he was headed there. Kids were fine at school, never saw anything. We did tour the houses. They had like big sections of the carpet missing in one of them. We bought a different house altogether, but I still think about one of those houses before Christ. It was a good house. Story 40. Not a realtor, but my spouse's last year, which I remind you, inventory was very low and prices were high. A couple who had been searching for 3 years found their dream home exactly what they were looking for. Seller was an elderly woman who wanted to move to somewhere smaller with less upkeep. Price was good, fair, and fair was as good as it got. The woman was amazing and just wanted the first offer at list price in this area. Most homes were going into bidding wars, but before the contracts could sign, the wife's dad chimed in with some boomer bees about not paying sticker and insisting they negotiate, and advising the couple that they were too eager should wait a couple months, then make an offer, talk her down. Obviously, boomer dad had no idea what he was talking about or the current market condition, so my wife rescinded the offer at the client's behest before anything was actually signed. Made a below list offer that was rejected. The house went under contract by the end of that same week for $330. 0,000 over list. My wife did eventually find them another house. They paid more. It was smaller and had fewer of the features they wanted, but the boomer dad was nowhere to be seen for that one. Story 41. Not a realtor, but my spouse's last year, which I remind you, inventory was very low and prices were high. A couple who had been searching for 3 years found their dream home exactly what they were looking for. Seller was an elderly woman who wanted to move to somewhere smaller with less upkeep. Price was good, fair, and fair was as good as it got. The woman was amazing and just wanted the first offer at list price in this area. Most homes were going into bidding wars, but before the contracts could sign, the wife's dad chimed in with some boomer bees about not paying sticker and insisting they negotiate, and advising the couple that they were too eager should wait a couple months, then make an offer, talk her down. Obviously, boomer dad had no idea what he was talking about or the current market condition, so my wife rescinded the offer at the client's behest before anything was actually signed. Made a below list offer that was rejected. The house went under contract by the end of that same week for $330. 0,000 over list. My wife did eventually find them another house. They paid more. It was smaller and had fewer of the features they wanted, but the boomer dad was nowhere to be seen for that one. Story 41. How about our bizarre reason for buying a house? We were looking in the Bay Area, and our 5-year-old son fell in love with one house because the people selling it had 2 little boys about his age. Our son thought it meant he would get 2 brothers. The people were so charmed by his misunderstanding that they decided we would make good owners. Their children actually left our son their outgrown toys to have something to remember them by. In the hot, competitive housing market at the time, it really worked out well. Story 42. House was pretty normal from the outside. Normal kitchen, some kitschy cosmetic stuff, like a 20-feet wall in the living room with the tropical beach scene print on it, like a giant stylized photo like Carl from Aqua Teen has. In his bedroom, whatever. But then the downstairs bedroom was carpeted, except the center of the room where they had the bed was tiled, and the tile extended over to a shower. Not in a bathroom, it was just a shower in the room. We turned around to leave and noticed the inside of the door was studded padded leather and had a peephole that looked in from outside the door. I assumed Keck's thing, but who knows, it was weird and just too much pass. Story 43. Not a realtor, but my friend was interested in this 120-ish-year-old house and brought me along to look at it. He was not handy, and this house was a turkey. I was pointing out uneven foundation settling. I was pointing out termite damage. I was pointing out sketchy-looking outdated wiring. I was pointing out masonry issues around the chimney. I was pointing out rotten soffits. He was undeterred. He wanted this house. Let's take a peek inside the circuit breaker panel. It had modern breakers, and that was one of the few things that was somewhat up to date on this house. We removed the cover. It was raining outside, and there was a small trickle of water inside the panel. He freaks out because water plus electricity narrow charts bad. He doesn't want this house anymore. And after brushing off my concerns all afternoon, that finally scared him off anyways. Unlike every other problem with this house, you can fix this particular issue for a few do by cocking around where the electrical service pokes through the wall. Story 44. Not a realtor, but my friend was interested in this 120-ish-year-old house and brought me along. During an open house, a buyer started feeling up the granite countertops and then backed up and said, "I can feel the radiation coming from the granite. Whoever buys this house will die from cancer. No worries, because I'm in a very high demand market and have like 200 other buyers wanting to buy the house." Was an escrow and representing the sellers on a resale 1987 built townhome in great condition. The buyers backed out because they requested my elderly sellers to replace all windows, all drywall, all flooring, install a brand new kitchen, upgrade it, and remodel all bathrooms. I told them it sounded like they wanted a new construction house and to piss off. Oh, one day prior to closing on a plot of Land that was being purchased in cash, the buyers had to back out because someone demanded a ransom from them, and they need the cash to pay the ransom. These buyers were weird and sketch from the get-go, but we would have never thought they would provide such an unusual reason to cancel escrow. My sellers got to keep the buyer earnest money, and we wished the buyers well. Story 46. Looked at a house a few years back with a woman I was dating at the time. Walked in. There was an enclosed front porch room where the floor was angled. Strangely looked structurally unsound, or at least in need of shoring up. Told my girlfriend, "Yeah, no, but we're here. Let's just tour the rest of it." The remainder of the house was completely decorated in what can only be described as flamboyantly gay medieval times. There were swords hanging from the wall. In every room, the master bedroom had a 4-pillar bed frame with a duvet cover that was a dragon on a rainbow. Every room was painted in a different bright primary color. The basement had a full suit of armor and shelves upon shelves of DVD cases. I saw that thousands of cases. Turned to my girlfriend again and said, "I refuse to read the titles on any of these. Let's go." Not sure what happened to the house, but I suggest anyone with eclectic tastes hire a stager before listing. Story 47. There was one house we really loved. Great size, great location, well maintained, etc. However, the only entrance to the master bathroom was through the master closet. Then there was a bonus room above the garage. It was easily accessible from the first floor via a staircase. However, the only way to access it from the second floor was through the master bathroom, which was through the M closet. Obviously, the bonus room above the garage was done after the house was built, and the contractor, the architect, art homeowner, whoever did it, had to be drunk and or high to lay it out that way. There were definitely other ways to grant access to the room, but my husband and I didn't want to put the time or money into figuring it out. It would have been an involved fix, I'm sure. Story 48. My dad's a realtor and landlord. He was running to this guy who said he wanted to buy my dad's house, the one he was renting. And my dad said he wasn't selling, but would be happy to find him something similar that was for sale. Dude could easily qualify for the purchase, but wasn't interested at all. My dad even found a house in the exact same layout, facing same direction, just 1 or 2 blocks over, and the guy still wasn't interested. The guy continued to rent for my dad for the next 20 years with rent increases until my dad did want to sell it. But after all that time, the guy couldn't get approved for the loan. He could have avoided all the rent increases and eventually getting forced to move if he had been willing to move a block over in the beginning. Story 49. Some old friends of mine were buying their first house and was sitting at the bank together with the seller. When he told them that with a minor raise he would leave the wiring in the house, then they understood it was time to leave. Story 50. Not a realtor, a house we looked at when buying Northern Virginia, so prices are dumb, but this was 20 years ago. Looked at a house built in the 60s that was listed as having a laundry room. After walking through, I asked my realtor if he'd seen it, thinking I had missed it. The owner was there, which was odd for a showing, but whatever. So we asked, "Where's the laundry?" Dude took us outside the house to a half door on the side and opened it up to reveal that they had dug a hole under the house and the laundry room was in this dirt hole. "Sir, you really expect us to pay almost $300K for a house that I have to crawl under to do my laundry?" Story 51. We were under contract for our first house, about a week to close. I went by one more time to check it out after work one day. Met the neighbor in the alley. Guy was a few years out of prison, shirtless skinhead that I suspected. Did meth. Told me about why he into prison, caught his old lady cheating and tried to cut the guy's head off. Proceeded to talk about how much his girlfriend's tits weighed and how they bathed her Alzheimer's father in the backyard with a hose noped out, and contacted my real estate attorney who was a friend, and he said, "We'll just say you can't come at the money for the down payment." Got our earnest money back, and everything ended up finding a much nicer house in a better neighborhood. Story 52. My family was looking for a new house when I was a kid. My parents found a really nice house in a really nice part of town. We walked in, and the place smelled of fresh bread and was just all around gorgeous. We went through most of the rooms without issue, and then we got to one of the bedrooms. It was filled with all the big Lego Star Wars sets. That was about it. For 7-year-old me, I was good by the house. I didn't need to see any more. My parents were less concerned with the Lego in the room and were more focused on one of the paintings on the wall. It was the Grim Reaper overlooking a crime scene with a Nazi flag flying from his side. My parents were quick to corral me out of the Nazi Lego room and back into the car. They didn't end up buying the house. Story 53. The dumbest one I've ever experienced was a couple backing out because I refused to repair the city curb and gutter on the street, and it made the house look trashy. It wasn't the approach. It was about 10 a.m. from The mailbox, where it looked as if someone parking on the street had continuously ran onto it or into it over the course of many years. Story 54. One bedroom smelled like cat piss, like bad, overpowering, awful cat piss. It was clearly the cat's room. There were beds and one of those tree things, litter boxes. But this wasn't a haven't cleaned a litter box in a few days. The cats piss all over the place, and we do nothing about it. Another one, we actually liked the house, but the people were in the house while we were touring it, just sitting and watching TV. We also think it was a family that took in foster kids, but the kind that take the kids in just for the money. There were a lot of beds in the rooms, mattresses on the floor, a lot of trash everywhere, like maybe walked through with a trash bag before. Showing the house, someone bought it to flip and did an okay job on it. Story 55. Not a realtor, but when I was trying to sell my condo, someone found out I had cats and didn't want to buy for that reason alone. There was no carpet, they had no allergies, they just didn't like cats. The cats were coming with me when I moved, and they didn't open up a portal to hell in the living room floor or anything. Story 56. We toured the whole house. She actually loved it. She was talking about all the updates she was going to make, how she was going to paint, how she was going to decorate, etc. The last room we came to was a full guest bathroom. It was admittedly not nice. It was poorly lit and had no windows, and it was strangely less well kept than the rest of the house. Well, my client freaked out and immediately ran outside. She said she could feel that someone definitely died in that bathroom, and they didn't want her to be there. It went from a 99% yes to an absolute no way, not happening, not in a million years. We ultimately found her a very nice house with no spookies in it. Story 57. Not a realtor, but had escaped to the country on in the background about a decade ago. Never forgot the lady they had, and could not get past the fact the current owner had a dining table in the middle of the kitchen. The presenter kindly said she didn't have to have her dining table there, but she couldn't get past it. Her talk to the camera after finishing the viewing was about hating the table in the kitchen, and it was brought up again to the presenter at the end as her reason for rejecting the house. Story 58. We have dogs when selling our home. The buyers during the inspection phase exercised their right to withdraw the offer because our dog Schmidt in the yard, not that there was any Schmidt in the backyard as I do the old poop and scoop, but their reasoning was you can't get all the poop out of the grass. Story 59. Not a realtor, but we looked at one place that had to have been a swinger club in some life. The bar was bigger than the kitchen. The owner's bath had a 57 jetted tub and a vanity that would have been amazing to do coke off of in the 70s. The primary bedroom was smaller than the bathroom. All of the other bedrooms were up a bewilderingly steep staircase. Only one out of the four of them had windows. There was a long, dim, windowless hallway connecting the bedrooms to the office, which was clearly added in the 90s and had a bathroom that would rival something found at a failing truck stop. There was a finished basement too, but our realtor didn't have a key. Story 60. When we were looking at houses, I rejected quite a few because they were facing the wrong direction. North, to be fair, I live at a high latitude, and living 3/4 of my life without sun coming in my windows was a no-go. Story 61. The house appraised. This is generally the outcome you want. It means the bank will loan you the amount for the home. If a home under appraiser from the price you offered, you have to cover the difference out of pocket to the seller. They were really hoping it would under appraise so they could renegotiate a lower price. When it didn't under appraise, they asked for 50 care and repairs and credits, knowing the seller would say no, allowing them to break contract and walk away. Story 62. Not a realtor, but a child of a realtor. I called my mom just for this post El Mayo. My mom once had clients who had their bid accepted on a house after very tense negotiations. They decided not to buy the house because once their offer was accepted, they felt like it was too easy to get the house, so there must be something wrong with it. They were shocked when their other bids weren't accepted and ultimately decided to stop looking for a house. Story 63. Not a realtor, but one place we looked at when buying had a dead cat. The former owners had moved away and abandoned their pets. There was a big bag of empty cat food and a dead black and white cat, absolutely sickening to see. Couldn't get it out of my mind. There were other things too, but that did it. Story 64. In the late 80s, my family was house hunting up in Buffalo. One house we lived that was rejected for other more substantial reasons. I think it had mold or something like that, but it also had this weird locked door in the wall between two floors. In other words, say there were 12 steps straight up, no landings from about the 4th to the 5th step. There was a random useless door where most people would hang pictures or wall hanging kind of Like something Sarah Winchester would have put in her house. I think my mom might have tried to nope out of that house even if there hadn't been anything else wrong with it. Story 65. We once looked at a 3-bedroom house but only saw 2 bedrooms. Our realtor called the listing agent, and in the course of the conversation she said, "In the closet, you're kidding." "Nope. You go into the closet in the main bedroom, turn to your left, and there was a handle on the baseboard. You lifted the handle, the whole side wall of the closet lifted up with counterweights, and there was a stairway behind the wall leading up to another bedroom." It was years ago, but we still occasionally mention the house with a bedroom in the closet. Story 66. When my wife and I were looking for our first house in 2012, we both thought it would be odd to buy a house from a couple going through a divorce and did not look at those houses when we bought our second house in 2021. The only houses on the market were couples divorcing. Story 67. Not a realtor, but had something bizarre happen while shopping for houses. Realtor took us to this Nick-looking family home, looked nice on the outside, seemed great. And then we stepped in to look inside and there was a strange-looking guy there. Greeted us pleasantly, didn't seem bothered, but he looked homeless and was cooking a can of beans on the stove in the can, so we got wary and decided to leave quickly. Realtor called up the owners a bit later, on to let them know a squatter had moved in, and they replied, "Oh no, that's just a friend of ours." Story 68. They brought in an astral advisor, and she didn't like the auras and claimed there were difficult spirits in the house. Although it probably didn't help, I had an altar to bath at with a fresh blood sacrifice in the dining room. It was a poor excuse to get out of a conditional sale. Story 69. Our realtor took us to a house that checked all the boxes on paper. There were no pictures of the inside, as it just hit the market layout and amenities. This house was ideal, but it hadn't been updated since the 70s or 60s. Pink tile bathrooms with pink toilets and baths, a green kitchen. The master was a newer addition, but they just built it on wooden stilts with no foundation. It was 20 colder, and imagine it would be a sauna during the summer. Story 70. We buyers passed on a house that we probably would have offered on due to air fresheners. Wasn't the only reason we passed, but was definitely weird. Walked into a choking cloud of overwhelming scent and found literally 15 air fresheners plugged in. We all had headaches by the end of the tour. Our realtor asked about it because it really seemed like there was something they were covering up, and the seller insisted she just likes it that way. Yeah, okay. Story 71. My cousin had a couple who decided not to buy because a new primary school and nursery were due to be built 400 meters down the street. They felt the school and kids would make too much noise. The couple were also hoping to start a family. They were eventually sold a house in a hamlet where any future kids would have to be driven to school nursery each day. They had to drive to do anything. They also both commuted 1.5 hours plus to London by train for work, so basically barely spent any time in the house anyway. Story 72. I know it sounds ridiculous, but we were inspecting the house, loved everything about it. We were both thinking about what we could do to make it ours within the boundaries of a heritage-listed house, Australia. But then, we walked into one of the bedrooms, walked straight out, kept going through the front door, and said we could never live there. We both got a terrible vibe. Story 73. Found a nice house in a nice neighborhood corner lot. No neighbors on one side and no neighbors in the back. When we went to see it, the backyard backed up to a cemetery and the gravestones were about 30-40 yards away. Wife was like, "Nope, I'm not drinking my coffee in the morning or wine in the evening looking at gravestones." Story 74. Not quite a direct answer to the question, but an odd one that's on a similar theme. When viewing a house and being given a tour by the realtor who had scheduled the visitation, we walked in on 2 people who were still active in their bedroom. Needless to say, we left fairly quickly. We find out later that they were renters who were not supportive of their landlord selling the house they were renting. Story 75. The buyer of one of my listings heard neighbors gossip that there has been a death in the house. The owner had in fact passed peacefully in a hospital, demanded a $70,000 credit to make up for it. We went back onto the market shortly after. Story 76. Not a house, but an RV. We were looking at it, and I was opening cabinets, looking for signs of water damage in one of the cabinets. There was some literature for a Lazy Boy recliner. Looking around for, I asked the lady, showing us the RV, "Where's the Lazy Boy?" Her reply, "He's inside watching TV." Story 77. I decided not to buy a townhouse because the next door neighbor had multiple parrots on her back porch that started talking to me when I stepped out onto my potential house's back porch. I turned it down because I didn't want to have to listen to random words being squawked by a parrot when I was trying to relax. Story 78, Realtor here. I arrived early for a showing. I entered the empty house, nicely appointed but older home. While waiting in the living room, I heard distinct footsteps upstairs directly above me. There was no one there. Buyers came and immediately loved the house. I had to tell them what I experienced and we immediately left. Story 79. Actually, I got told this by my dad was house searching and most recently decided to stop. My mom said there weren't enough plants in the house. The house was fully furnished, had recently been given the okay by the Builders of Integrity and Plumbing, and was priced nearly 35% lower than other houses in the area. She said, was the plants, you can always buy more plants. Story 80. Not a realtor, but my ex bought a house because he wanted people to see him as an adult. He was like 22 or 23. Then he took out multiple mortgages and a huge HELOC and didn't do any home maintenance at all. So when he moved out of state, the house was worth about $40K and he owed over $70K 25 years later. Thank Bob, he's in 10th story. 81. We looked at a house that had a partially finished basement, opened a door on the unfinished side, and flipped a light switch. There was nothing in the room but a clown doll hanging from the ceiling by a rope tied around its neck. Nope. Story 82. When I was house hunting, I toured a house with no drawers in the kitchen. It had just been redone, and they put in a slide-out garbage recycling area. And the only place drawers made sense, I didn't want to store my utensils in a cupboard. Story 83. My parents were selling their home, had a couple look at it, loved it, made an offer and gave a large crap deposit. Wife had a nightmare about the basement of the house and they backed out of the sale. Needless to say, they did not get their crap deposit back. There was no nightmare clause. Story 84, buyer here. When I was looking for houses, I saw this one house that was listed as a 1-2B 3-bedroom house on paper. Doable. The location of the 2 bathrooms were both on the other side of the kitchen, and literally across the 3 OT wide hall from each other. Story 85. A realtor friend of mine said that she showed this couple their perfect home, but the wife did want it because there were fruit trees in the backyard and she would feel bad about not taking care of them and letting them die. Story 86. I ended up living there as a renter, but the property manager told me it had been sold until the couple buying it realized the address included 6,666 guests. They even forfeited the earnest money. I thought that was kind of insane, TBH.